This is episode 84 of the Beyond the Food Show, and today we're talking to Irene Lyon about what you've likely never been told about adrenal fatigue. My name is Stephanie Dodier, and I'm a clinical nutritionist. At 35, I was trapped with severe anxiety, adrenal fatigue, panic attack, obesity, and my health completely collapsed. I needed solution, and the journey began. Each episode of the Beyond the Food Show, we bring you an expert or a message to help you achieve your health goal, unlock your self-confidence, and lead a better life. This episode of the Beyond the Food Show is brought to you by Beauty Counter. Beauty Counter creates safer and effective skincare and cosmetics for women in the family. Beauty Counter meticulously screened for ingredients for safety, so our beauty ladies can not only be safer, but also effective and better. For Beauty Counter, it's not about perfection, it's about progress. You can find out more at stephaniedodier.com/beautycounter. Now, today's episode, we're talking with Irene Lyon, and it's a very, 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 very important episode. Irene Lyon, I am a fan of her work. You've seen me refer to her many times. We had her on the podcast on episode 33, where we talked about how the trauma is locked in our body, and that's a solution to our emotional eating and craving. And today, yet again, she is going to blow your mind about what you've never been told regarding adrenal fatigue and why you're likely not able on your super duper protocol to heal it. It's going to be mind-blowing. We are going to talk for a long time. So this is a content warning for anybody listening right now. This is a long episode. It is an hour and 15 minutes. So I'm giving you permission to listen to it in bits. Take pauses. When the information sounds too overwhelming for you, press pause, so you can really be present to this information for the whole conversation. Now, one more content warning is the fact that you may have reaction in your body to the content that will be shared with you today. You know how I refer to your craving, your emotional eating, your binges has a message from your body, literally your body talking through you, through your relationship to food. Well, Irene talks the exact same word in her work, but from a nervous system perspective. So she will tell you that your body talks to you. So while you're hearing this information, you may have reaction in your body, different sensation that you are feeling, and that's okay. Just press pause, feel the sensation, chill, and then come back to the information that's being shared with you today. Now, I didn't introduce yet the official bio of our guest today, but Irene Lyon is a nervous system specialist and a therapeutic coach who helps people just like you and me, transform their body, businesses, relationship through the regulation of their nervous system. And she helped me. I took her courses. And that is why I'm introducing her to you, because I think she can change your life. And I'm not using those words lightly. If you can understand what she's about to explain today, it will not only help your adrenal fatigue, but it will definitely change your relationship to your craving, to your emotional eating, and to your binge eating. Now, last episode 83 that released on Thursday, I kind of introduced you to this whole concept of our body reacting to truth, to areas of our life that we need to address beyond craving and emotional eating. And this is a warning for today. So if you haven't yet listened to 83, go back and check it out. Now, are you ready to do this? If so, let's do this. Welcome, Miss Irene Lyon, to the Beyond the Food podcast.
Hi.
I'm so excited to have you here. Like, you guys have no idea how excited I am for you. Irene is the first ever guest that have had a second time on the podcast. I've had Irene on episode 33. And for the listener, if you want to go back there, we talked about how trauma gets stuck in our body and how it affects our body, our weight, and our relationship to food. And you're the first one that I have second time. This is how much I love you.
Wow, I feel so special. Thank you.
So for the new listener who may not know who Irene Lyon is, what is it exactly that Irene Lyon help people with?
You want me to answer that?
That would be lovely if you could.
Well, I help people with a lot of things. My background is actually in fitness and nutrition. So I started in my 20s doing what a lot of people do when they want to help people, right? Yep. Which is important. Nutrition is important. Exercising is important. I still think it's one of the most important things. But what happened was I got injured ski racing. I was a big daredevil, in BC here. And I got some injuries. And long story short, what I had learned in my exercise rehabilitation courses wasn't helping me recover my body, which was a big eye-opener because I had just spent, 7 years at university. I'm like, uh-oh. So I ended up getting into a very sophisticated form of, I call it mind-body environment awareness work, something called Feldenkrais. And I know you and I haven't talked a lot about that, but that was my first entry into the healing arts that's non-traditional, let's just say. Okay. And then I loved it. It actually healed my body. It healed all my injuries. And then I decided to practice it. So I got trained to become a Feldenkrais teacher. So I did that in 04 to 07, started practicing, had really good results with many of my clients, but there was a subset of people that were still not getting better. Even though I was doing everything that had helped me, they were still not resolving their back pain or their knee pain, or there was just chronic pain everywhere. And I started to investigate, as you do when you're still looking for answers. And I stumbled across the work of Peter Levine. So for those of you that don't know, he is still alive. He's the seminal author of a book called Waking the Tiger, which was really one of the first books out there that talked about how stress and trauma get stuck in the body, specifically the nervous system, and why humans, us, tend to trap that traumatic stress, and then eventually it makes us sick. And he really was like, holy cow, like there's a reason why animals in the wild don't end up with a lot of these chronic illnesses that us humans do. And sure, they die and they get eaten and all that, but they typically don't get the kind of chronic fatigue, obesity, right? You don't see an obese wild animal. You'll see an obese house cat or house animal, but you won't see that in the wild. And it's because they're just in their natural environment. They're doing what Mother Nature programmed us mammals, because we're all mammals here, to do. And he got interested. So he studied it. He started to develop his own way of working with human beings and started to figure out how to help humans who have been so conditioned to store stress, how to start getting them to feel their bodies again, be with their sensations, be with the feelings that we don't like to feel all the time, and emit, emote, move, not from an exercise point of view, but move patterns that are stuck in the body. And that I started studying, it completely blew my mind. And that was in, '08. Which is almost 10 years ago now. Oh my goodness. So I studied that, started practicing that, and it was literally, Stephanie, gave me like this beautiful sword of healing to help people in such a different way. And then, as you do, you learn more from other people. One of his senior faculty members, her name is Kathy Kane. She's in the United States as well, and she has developed her, I don't like to call it offshoot, but her way of working with adrenal fatigue and burnout and really low level energy, chronic illness, chronic fatigue, very mysterious immune system problems.
Fibromyalgia,
thyroid problems, chemical sensitivities, what is so common in so much of Western world, let's say. Mm-hmm. And when I say that, I usually cluster North America, England, Ireland, Scotland. Europe is a little more protected from these things, and Australia, New Zealand. So that's kind of the populations I see that have these problems really badly. But she realized that working with the human system from a very strategic nervous system, I call it stress organ level, working directly with the adrenals and the kidneys, working directly with the gut, working directly with the brain stem, which is one area that signals danger when we've had lots of threat. So, long story short, I got into this work through that mode, started to just follow the breadcrumb trail really to the people that were doing the next cutting edge work. And then I kind of landed on my last real mentor has been Kathy and one of her colleagues, Steve Terrell, who works specifically with kids who have troubles. And the work has just sort of blown my mind in terms of how we can heal adrenal fatigue burnout, not with diet, not with mindfulness, but with going like directly into the physiology.
That's mind-blowing.
It is.
It is mind-blowing. So I know for people in the podcast listening right now, some of you may or may not know what adrenal fatigue is. So we'll start there. So I would say probably 50% of the audience likely understand the concept of adrenal fatigue. But what is it from your perspective? And then I'll layer in my clinical nutrition stuff on top of it. But what is adrenal fatigue for you?
So the first thing, we could cluster it as people that have no energy.
Yeah.
I always use a glass as a little prop. There's our tank of gas. When there's no more energy or gas in our system, we just can't move it. Yeah. So when someone gets to this point that we would classify as adrenal fatigue, burnout, and not just mental burnout, but body burnout, there literally is no more juice to get up and have energy. You feel sluggish, you feel heavy, even though you might not be heavy. Your digestion is just not working properly. Your immune system is not fighting off viruses. Cuts don't heal as well. The gut is just not working. In other words, there's either chronic constipation or chronic diarrhea, or usually both. So then you're not absorbing nutrition properly, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So there's all those symptoms and signs. What we need to understand first is what the adrenals actually are. I'm starting to gesture to get into my hand miming skills. So if everyone who's watching this, I like to teach and get people into their bodies. So if you imagine at your mid-back, kind of lower, but above the lower back, there's these two organs that are kind of fist-shaped, which are your kidneys. They filter your urine. They help the acid base in the body stay well. They're very important, clearly. And then on top of each kidney is an adrenal gland. It's like a little hat. And that adrenal gland pumps out our adrenaline, another one called noradrenaline, and cortisol. So these are all important chemicals, hormones. We need them, right? So adrenaline isn't bad, cortisol isn't bad. People are talking cortisol is bad. It's not bad. We need it, right, in appropriate doses throughout the day. And you probably have more knowledge on this than me, so I'll let you cover that. But what happens is, so let's say I have a stress. I have a threat, right? My system goes into fight, flight, pumps out adrenaline. It gets ready to go, heart rate goes up, and let's say the stress goes away. The moment we release adrenaline, at the exact same time, there's a release of the chemicals that dissolve it. So there's like this simultaneous release of the chemical and release of the thing, that's the technical term, the thing that then dissolves it and brings it back into the stream, and then we pee it out, right? Which is what we want. So that's like one stress, okay? If someone has a lot of stress, a lot of adversity, a lot of abuse, now typically, I'm kind of side shuffling here, the people that I see that suffer from burnout, biological burnout, chronic fatigue, fibromyalgia, adrenal fatigue, have had some form of long-term childhood abuse, early trauma. Life has just been really tough, whether it's where you live, your family system, whatever. And what happens is that when you're in that kind of unsafe environment where there's constant threat, or maybe it's even perceived threat, maybe you're not being abused, but your mother's scared to death, right? This is really important. So you may have been cared for so well by your mom, which so many people are, but she's hating her job. She's stressed. Maybe mom and dad are fighting. Maybe there is no other partner. So she's just, the single mom that's just doing everything. Her stress, we're going to feel it as a baby. And so we're going to be in this alert mode. So what happens when we have constant stress, adrenaline goes out. But the important thing to know is that adrenaline is short acting. It only lasts for a few seconds. And so what the body does, because it's smart, is that it realizes, hey, this person is like needing adrenaline all the time. So we're going to bring in a bigger chemical that's long acting so that the stress response, so that we can be prepared. And that long acting chemical hormone is cortisol. Because cortisol has a long acting cycle. It stays around for I think it's 24 hours. But what happens is that cortisol, when pumped out too much, it gets into the DNA and it's actually toxic to the cells, right? Again, you know this.
Yeah.
And so what occurs is this poor system that is constantly into a stress, fight, flight reaction starts to bring out cortisol because it's an adaptive response to constant threat. If that constant threat continues and continues, sooner or later, the cortisol is going to get worn out, right? And this is where we hear about people that have low cortisol or flatline cortisol. And it's kind of like their systems become robotic and there's no more flow. There's no more good ups and downs, right? We need to have cortisol come out at the right time of day so we wake up. Then we need it to drop at night so we go to sleep. And what occurs is that there becomes just this chaotic soup in the physiology and the neurochemistry where the system doesn't know anymore when to release what and when. And I'm doing this with my hands, but literally it's we need now we're going to shut that down. And okay, we're going to keep going here. And there's none of this nice flow, right? And that funny example I just gave with my hands, that's also what occurs in our digestive system, in our circulatory system. So rather than being this nice organismic pumping and fluid and, taking in nutrients, taking out waste products, things are just
all over the place.
All over the place. And a lot of people, when you talk to them, they'll say, it feels chaotic, but it also feels confusing. It's and when I work with people at the beginning, they know there's a confusion. They know something's not right. And because they haven't been taught to listen to the internal chemistry and know actually why their adrenals have pumped out so much chemicals, it's kind of this odd thing that's really hard to verbalize, but they kind of are there's something off. There's something not right. And they can feel it. Even though they can't see the chaos, it's felt. And so what happens is we pump out all this cortisol, the system starts to wear down, the immune system literally starts to not repair because it's not going into proper rest mode. And that's another thing we can talk about if you want to get into the parasympathetic and the vagus nerve. But what basically happens is the person just burns out because there's no more juice left. And if the original threats that cause the person to go into this fight, flight, and eventually shut down because they just can't keep mounting a stress response, and this is often what occurs in kids, is they'll be feisty and they'll be, all over the place. And then all of a sudden they'll just be resigned. And it's fine, I can't fight anymore. It's not biologically in my favor to keep fighting the situation, so I'm just going to shut down. And this is also, that's a bigger scale, but that's also happens when someone's, say, attacked. Often someone who's attacked will say, I couldn't move. I was frozen with fear. That's actually a biological advantage so that the person doesn't get more hurt, right? So there's this interesting issue with us humans is that we have such brilliance from a biological point of view to protect us. And yet, say I had that childhood where there was all this threat, and I actually did okay to get myself out of that crappy situation. I started eating well. I started taking care of myself. I started going to therapy, and I'm living in a good environment with a good husband or wife, and I've got good kids, and I'm good to my kids. but my system is still sick, it's usually because that underlying physiology has never been healed, right?
And that's the key here.
It's never been healed. A lot has been healed psychically
and physically.
And physically, to know I shouldn't be in these toxic environments, this toxic job, this toxic relationship. I've moved away from my family of origin. These are all very important things, actually. But if that underlying sequencing in not just the brain, but in how the brain connects to the kidney, adrenals, and to the gut, if that's still firing, saying, the world is a dangerous place, the world is a dangerous place, get me out of here, the physiology is still taxed. That makes sense?
Totally. Is that what we call having emotion or trauma still stuck in our nervous system?
You got it.
Okay.
You got it.
You did an amazing job defining this from all the angle of it. I just want to wrap this up for the functional medicine ladies listening to this. That is what you get when you get a cortisol or HPA saliva testing.
Yeah.
What she's defining is what you're going to see when they measure your cortisol.
Yeah.
And then adrenal fatigue in the world of functional medicine is getting kind of worn out because it's really not fatigue. It's either overexcited, exhaustion. So you can't really have your adrenal fatigue. They either promote too much or just not enough. So that's what maybe you've been diagnosed with or been tested with. And you do the nutrition, you do the movement, you stop overworking and all of that, but you still can't fix it. That's what we're just assessing here that nobody talks about out there. Is having the emotions stuck in your body, which, and I will wrap this up for everyone to understand when we talk about emotional eating, that you just don't know why you binge, you just don't know why you crave. In part, it's likely due to what we just explained here.
Yeah, it is.
Emotions stuck there.
It's emotions, and I'll add one more thing. It's emotions, and it's also the internal threat physiology. So that desire to fight, to flee, that's still circulating, right? And one of the key words that actually blankets all of this is safety.
Yes.
So if I think about, I'll just use a scenario without, talking about specific clients, but what often I've seen is that a child will be brought up in a very unsafe environment. They may have all the money in the world, right? But it has nothing to do with that. There's no attachment, no attunement, and no emotional connection. And a little person needs help learning about their emotions because we're not wired to know how to work with those as humans, right? We need to be taught. And one of the things that children will go towards to help soothe, you might know where I'm going with this.
This is my story, by the way.
Yeah, where they might go to soothe is through food, or it could be through reading, or it could be through being an introvert, or it could be through being an extrovert. It could be anything. But it's something to distract that little person from feeling the stuff that they don't know how to deal with. And it's not just emotion, it's sensation. So there will be anxiety in the chest, or the belly will feel off, or there's like a tightness in the body. And so what happens is not only when we eat do we occupy our senses with the digestion of food, but when we eat, we're chewing, we're putting something in our mouth, and that actually sparks up the social engagement nervous system, which directly impacts the heart by bringing the heart rate down.
So are you talking about flavor in food also? Because I'm doing a sideway research at the impact of flavors in our food versus bland food and the impact on craving. Are you saying that flavor impacts that part of the nervous system?
To be honest, I don't know. I haven't come across that. I know that certain things like sweet and salt and crunch are very common. And I think it's just because it literally gives us an explosion.
Of sensation.
My husband's a good example. He grew up in a horrific situation and very unsafe. And one of his biggest things is sour candies, because it just literally gives you a bit of a slap, and you have to be into the present moment when you eat a sour candy, your whole body kind of, right? And what happens is when we haven't learned how to feel, and process, we miss that exquisiteness of feeling our emotions and sensations and feeling the body shivers, feeling the true relaxation. And the nervous system, I'm going to have my finger here, it works like in these waves, up, down, up, down. So when we have a stressor, we go up. If we stay stuck and we don't know how to process that up, we kind of get stuck and there's no relief. This is what chronic tension is too. You get the massage and you stretch, but you stay stiff. It's because the system doesn't know how to come out and down, like a letdown.
And that's the release of the chemical, like stopping releasing the cortisol so the body can go in relaxation mode. Like it's not just emotional, it's biochemistry.
It's physical.
Both. Like it's emotional and physical. It's both.
It's all
of it.
It's hormonal, it's neurological, it's chemical, it's physical, it's the blood shifting pressure. It's that beautiful feeling like when a baby is crying and they are then given a bottle or a breast. It's actually not so much important if it's bottled, it's something to suck on. That allows their system to go, oh.
Yes.
Right? And it's the same with the food. So what's happened is if we didn't get that early imprint of learning how to self-soothe through that nurture, through food practices that weren't riddled with threat, consequence, reward, which is so bloody insidious in our culture, right?
Totally. Well, that's part of the food emotional connection. Yeah. We reward children with ice cream at Dairy Queen.
Yeah. Or if you don't eat your vegetables, you won't.
Yeah.
Like, so there's all these games that we play. And really, if we could just bring children into the world, I mean, it all comes back to the kids, right? If we can just bring kids into the world learning how to self-regulate with their emotions, which has to happen through mama or papa or nanny, and then make food not a big deal.
Just nourishment instead of emotion.
Yeah. And you go to third and second world countries. My mother's from the Philippines, and I see it when you go to the villages. Like, there's no fighting over what to eat. You know, it's just, that's what you eat and you eat it and then you go and you do your things. There's no, right? Food is a big thing, but it isn't a way of coping.
Or experiencing emotion or sensation.
Yeah. Well, it can be joyous because you're with people in good relationship. But, you know, I've sat, Stephanie, too many dinners with friends, bless their hearts, who play these games with their children, and the dinner table conversation is never about laughing and fun and how is school? It's eat another bite. Why aren't you eating this? Look at your sister, how good she's being eating her food. It's like, look at mommy, she loves her vegetables. Like, the moment we start that dialogue, it kills the pure nourishment of what food is and how we are supposed to share and sit around the fire, right? And eat the meat off of the bone and all that thing.
Slowly. So I want to move a little bit for people to understand. So go back to episode 33 if you want to hear my whole story with adrenal fatigue. But that's in part the reason why I came across Irene's work, is because I couldn't find the solution to my own situation with all the knowledge that I have and all the testing and everything. And so my adrenal fatigue situation started probably 10 or 15 years ago, and I was living with it and coping, like literally finding coping mechanism through my life and my body until my body decided that couldn't do it anymore.
Nope.
Like curl on the floor, like can't move, and has like no life whatsoever to me because my system finally gave up.
Was that around your 30s?
That was at the age of 39, 40.
Okay, so and this is the thing I didn't mention, is that in our culture, one of the things that happens, and this is why, and you were telling me before we started recording that a lot of your people are in their 30s, 40s, maybe probably 50s. We have a reserve for about a dozen, if you're lucky, 20 years. It depends on the severity of trauma, because I'll meet some kids that are in their early 20s and they already have adrenal burnout. And this is sadly happening sooner. right? Because kids don't have the same kind of vigor that they had when we were growing up, which is really sad. But what happens is there's like that type A, go, 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 corporate world, I can do it all. And the kidneys and the adrenals actually can give us a lot. They can work, but they're also the final organ to go. If you think about it, if somebody has kidney failure,
oh, they're done.
They're done. Like you can actually have other things fail and you can last, but the moment you have to, you're screwed. And yet we don't really talk about these organs very much until they finally go off. So what happens is the type A person happens, they go, go, go. I'm invincible. I never get sick, and then something will happen, whether it's a life event, a death, a job, whatever. And then it gives the system, this moment of pause, and then everything just comes crashing down.
Yeah. And for me, you know what it was? In part, it happened shortly after, and we're not going to go there because I know you want to go there, a Vipassana retreat. So I did for Vipassana, that's a deep level of meditation, 10-day silent retreat, which made me feel awesome and allowed me to learn to meditate. But a month after that, that's when my system crashed.
Yes.
Because I finally had that peace allowed to come down.
You had the peace and you pierced into a part of your system that you hadn't yet actually experienced.
Exactly. And I want to give it, again, a little bit more context for women to recognize themselves in this story. I wasn't abused. I wasn't physically, mentally abused. I just had two type A parents that pushed the crap out of me from the tender age of 6, like sports, school, like top grades. I had to win all the competition. And to cope, I turned to food. I became overweight. I stopped doing sports. So it was something else. So what I want you to hear, ladies, is that trauma is not what we believe to be trauma, like raping and sexual abuse. Trauma can be very...
it's called insidious would be the word.
Insidious, yes.
Yeah. And this is actually an important point because, yes, the abuse is very much important.
Totally there.
But what I've seen, and this is a generality, but when there has been that level of visual, like things were bad, you were hit, there was definitely sexual assault, all that it. But this accepted type A, drive that child to be perfect, it is actually, from what I've seen, a tougher type of stress to heal. Because it's accepted.
Yes.
Right? And the kid doesn't know any different. It just thinks this is the way life is. Therefore, I need to do this. And it really is hard to convince someone and to tell them that was trauma. And trauma isn't necessarily in the event. It's in how the nervous system processes the external triggers, the external stress. So someone like yourself, that little person, you were in like adrenal craziness that whole time, shock, right? Like, okay, let's keep doing this. Let's keep going. And there's certain cultures actually, Stephanie, that are better and worse for that. I've seen that a lot of the Asian clients and cultures, like those poor kids have been driven so hard. And I find that is a culture that's really tough to talk to because they actually don't know that there's a different way.
I didn't know there was a different way till the age of 36.
Yeah.
There was just that was the way of living. And anyone else who wasn't living that way was just not worth mentioning. It was just like, they're not going to get anywhere in life because that's what I was exposed to. But I don't want to go into this, but the point of me sharing this was for people to understand that adrenal fatigue and what leads to it. Maybe you think it's small, but actually, as Irene's explaining to you, it's a major player into where you are today in your state of adrenal fatigue.
We could say that our toxic capitalistic world is adrenal fatigue. And as a culture collectively, we're at that point of true burnout.
Oh, yeah. So it's something, I always say that, and I was saying that to somebody else an hour ago. At some point, something's going to have to change. It's either we're all going to crash together, or we're all going to learn from you, from me, from people who are proning alternative ways of living life because we just can't keep going. And before we go further, I just want to, maybe it wasn't trauma when you were young, but maybe the way you live your life today, for you, it's normal. But to your nervous system, it's an absolute disaster.
It is. And that's where the symptoms trip, so people often won't connect bad bowel process, like bad poops, and trouble digesting food as something connected to chronic stress. But what happens is when the system is in that fight, flight, and shutdown, when you've gotten to the point of shutdown, the portion of the parasympathetic nervous system that helps us rest, digest, and heal and repair the immune system and repair the lining of the gut, that part of the nervous system is like not online. And so what occurs is the part that's online is the part that's on the spectrum of being really shut down. And so the system is literally, I compare it to like a bog, a body of water that has no flow in it. And it's just kind of stagnant. There's a few bugs in there that are surviving, but there's no fish, there's no greenery. That's what occurs when we get into that really burnt out, shut down state. The system is literally working in this like sluggy, sludgy, and then the digestion goes off. Like I mentioned, we don't heal from viruses quickly. We wake up not refreshed. It's like to go up the stairs feels like we've just climbed Everest and yet we haven't done anything that day. So those are all signs and symptoms of the system being in this lockdown of the nervous system.
In functional medicine, we call that stage 3 of adrenal fatigue. 4 is death.
Yes.
3 is like crash, curled on the floor, can't move. And then you've got stage 1 and 2, which is overexcitement.
Yes, exactly.
So it's not like you don't just have to be curled on the floor, can't move. You can be in like overexcited, anxious all the time and worried, like overexcited, and you still have quote unquote adrenal fatigue.
You got it. It's a spectrum.
Yes.
And when people know that they're in that, the best thing I can say, and I know you would agree, is do something about it.
Yes.
Like before it gets to the point where, a person can recover when they're in that stage 3. I've seen it happen many times, many times. But if you can get it a little sooner, it might feel really hard because when you're going, there's no reason to stop. But it's like our good friend, I know you appreciate Gabor Mate's work, book When the Body Says No. Most of the patients he took care of at palliative care when he was at the Vancouver General Hospital, they were at that stage 3 going on to 4 because they had autoimmune diseases, cancers, ALS, MS, lupus, rheumatoid arthritis, because they never stopped when they were in that go, go, go.
They never heard the message from their body. And that's the whole teaching of the whole platform going beyond the food. And for us, we use our craving or our binge eating or whatever as a mean of listening to our body, that our body's speaking to us.
Yes. It's a behavior.
Yes.
And that's actually, I wanted to mention that is, we look at food addiction, but also exercise, work, sex, shopping, distractions. They're behaviors that we have to do to stay regulated.
Bingo.
This is the thing is I've worked with many people that have addictions of all sorts. I'm not an addiction specialist, but what happens is when you can actually heal that underlying stress chemistry and teach the system how to self-regulate and regulate, the behavior becomes less important. And it's really important to say to people, it's okay that you might have just binged or maybe you had too much to drink or you had a smoke. I'm more interested in, are you learning how to be with your stress chemistry and feel it? And eventually people's behaviors start to shift.
Perfect. That's exactly the whole philosophy of how I teach people to deal with their craving. And what I'm trying to express to people is you can go on a diet and go keto, go off sugar, which is all good things. But if you don't deal, right? But if you don't deal with what you're trying to numb, what you're trying to balance, it will come back. Oh, yeah.
They've done research where people who are morbidly obese and they do bariatric surgery to make their stomachs really small so they don't eat as much. And they stop eating as much and they lose weight. But then what happens? They become alcoholics or they become addicted to cigarettes. And it's because the reason that is there is because they're trying to self-soothe. So the chemistry, while what you're taking in has changed, the internal chemistry, got to go back to that stress chemistry. It's still sending out the signals that there's danger, it's unsafe, I can't cope with these emotions, these sensations, therefore we have to, right?
Yeah.
So
Numb it.
And if a person has to do that from time to time while they're working on their trauma, fine. I'd rather someone have what we would call a relapse than never work on feeling the uncomfortable stuff.
And it's funny because when I teach people to deal with their binge eating, the first step is just to be present with the binge.
Yes.
That's
know
the
that
first
you're
step.
Doing it.
Like feel the food in your mouth, feel your overstuffed stomach, how you feel. Like just feel it. Don't try to stop it.
Yeah.
The very first day you say, I'm going to fix my binge, I'm just going to stop it. It's just going to mount and become this big monster.
Yeah. It's like a dam, right? A river. If you keep damming it, that water is going to keep.
Yeah,
right?
It's there.
It's there.
So from your perspective, how do we, big word, heal adrenal fatigue? Or how do we begin to address this?
So from my perspective, I'm all about first, number one is education.
Okay.
So the more I do this work, the more I see getting more education on board than you think you need is actually essential. Okay. So we've just brushed over a very grand scale surface, but learn more about your nervous system. Learn more about what the sympathetic and parasympathetic branches are. Learn about your vagus nerve because there's different branches to the vagus nerve. I know you've learned this through me.
I've done the course with Irene. What's the name of the course I did? The
21-day nervous system cleanup. So learn about that because what I've seen, because we're creatures of cognition and we want to know, right? We're curious. When we get that education on board, people start to feel and shift things without even doing practice. So that's the first thing. Because then you'll notice, like when you're driving down and someone cuts you off, you'll feel your fight come up and you'll know what that is. Rather than thinking, oh, I'm just grumpy today. It's like, no, that's your irritation. That's your fight response, wanting to like literally hurt that person because they just wronged you. And there's nothing wrong with feeling that, but we've been taught that's not good. Don't feel that, be kind.
Yes.
Right? But we're animals, so we need to understand that part of us. The second thing is learning, I call it biological self-awareness.
Okay.
So just like I said, someone cuts you off, all of a sudden your fist, grip on the steering wheel and you want to hit something. That is your biology responding to a threat. Okay. Even though that person didn't pull a gun to your head or anything like that. It's like, well, I know that happens sometimes, but
that's rare.
Yeah. You're trying to complete a stress response. So listening to the biology, one of the things I teach my clients first is real simple things like when you have to go pee, feel it.
And go pee.
And go. When you start to feel your descending colon bringing, bowel movement to your rectum, don't start doing another task. Go to the bathroom. Be with the biology. And
I would say to you, which you heard me talk about, that's a step of self-care.
Heck yeah.
Taking care of our poop. And when the body's ready to poke it out, don't push it away saying, I've got to do one more thing.
Yeah.
That's a great way to start.
I always joke with my people, it's like better out than in. It's like when you sneeze, and my husband's terrible for this because he was a chef. So when you're cooking, you have to hold it.
Yeah.
That's so bad on the system. So when you're sneezing, sure, if you have to cover your mouth but sneeze. You have to cough, and don't say, excuse me. If you have to burp, fart, I know our culture isn't good with this kind of thing, but you go into other cultures, more tribal, and they're healthy, right? So biological self-awareness, to me, it isn't about being mindful. It's about listening to the gurgles, listening to the airways, listening to, I feel a little sick in my stomach, and tracking, did I just eat something that maybe I shouldn't have, but I did because that's my routine.
Or because that's the right thing to do. And I have that a lot in restrictive diets. Like it's
Oh,
telling me like to eat 200 grams of fat a day,
yeah.
but I feel sick to my stomach. Well, maybe you can digest that much fat. You need to listen to that sensation in your body.
Here's a great story. I was working with someone and their breakfast ritual was a smoothie with fruit and berries and yogurt, which is great, you know. That morning they started to do the smoothie thing and something said no.
Beautiful.
What did they do? They kept making
Yes.
the smoothie.
Oh, absolutely.
They drank it and then they felt sick afterwards. So as subtle as that is, the body has such exquisite tuning. We have an internal tuning fork, right? But we have trained ourselves. Every morning you eat toast. Every lunch you have a salad. You got to have vegetables with every meal. And yes, vegetables are good, but like maybe that night your system just wants a potato and a piece of chicken because there's a little bit of stress going on. This is just an example. And it needs that so that it actually can process no fiber that night.
Yeah.
And then the next day you might crave nothing but vegetables. And so we get into this worry of these routines that have become so popularized with the nutritional self-help movement, which I think has given us information, but it's also detached us from our natural impulse.
It's more than I think. It's a fact. The more diets we put out to the world, the less connected we are with intuitive eating and knowing how to nourish ourselves.
Totally. We know. And the reason why it's so tough, Stephanie, is I talked about the babies at the beginning and the toddlers learning how to eat. When we were not allowed to sniff out what we wanted, and this doesn't mean a child saying, I want this for dinner. Like that's very different. But it's the parents gave a whole variety of healthy foods and they allowed the child to choose. And this is what we learned in applied human nutrition is if you give a toddler a smorgasbord of good healthy food, they will choose what they need. But what happens is then there's that, like I said, it's like you have to eat this. And what a big person doesn't realize is a little toddler has a very small stomach. Right? They can't, and we don't know how much they're supposed to eat. And yet we force them to finish their plate. Right? And so that, like I said, education, biological self-awareness, listening to these basic physiological, biological functions in the body, so important. And then the third thing is working with what I call the stress organs. So this is something that's a bit more advanced. You wouldn't have gotten it in the smaller course that you did, but I covered in my 12-week program, is learning to actually listen to the adrenals, listen to the kidneys, feel and visualize them being tight and on guard, tuning into the gut and actually knowing that you have a gut, right? Like we talk about the stomach, but we don't really put the mind and the brain into all the paths. Like that's where the food first goes and it gets digested, with acid, and then it moves into the small intestine, and then that's where all the nutrients get sucked in, and then the colon, and that's where the water comes out and the poop is formed. Like being able to actually laser in is immensely healing, and yet we don't connect to that really ever.
And I'm laughing because I got to tell you a personal story. My brother, when I first came back home, my brother told me that he had, in French we say a bedon, but a tummy issue, like a digestive issue in his intestine. And then I started looking at him and I was giving him advice and it wasn't working. I'm like, show me where the pain is. Yeah. It was actually under his ribcage in his stomach. He didn't even know like where and what was wrong with him. So yeah, totally. Like people have to understand how their body works and connect physically with it. Totally. And so when you connect with it and you work at that stress organ level, what happens, if I go back to the kidney adrenals, right? That adrenal gland, when I work with someone one-on-one, I'm actually using touch, but I teach people to do self-touch. Like right now, we can even imagine those kidneys and adrenals there. And we can even imagine just what would it be like for them to soften a little bit. And I like to use the visual like as if they're floating in warm, salty bath water or an ocean,
right? Just very fluid, and feel the butt on the chair and how they can just, because the kidneys are very similar to the male testicle. When they get stressed, they go, or when they get cold, right? Kidneys will actually go up closer to our shoulder blades. Someone who is really stressed and working hard and in that stage 2, often their kidneys will be up near their shoulder blades, like the tip. And when you work with someone and you hold that area and you start to bring safety to their system, you let the kidney and adrenal know you don't have to work as hard, you're okay, you can actually rest. You will feel, I will feel in my hand, that organ drop and it relaxes. Usually there's almost like a crackling you feel. They might feel a pain, a sharp pain, because it's like a muscle releasing, because it is a muscle. And then all of a sudden there's like a pulse and then heat. And then one interesting thing, Stephanie, is if someone is in that type A and their kidney and adrenal relaxes, very shortly after that, there's another burst of, no, we can't. And then it tightens again and you wait for it because it'll often happen. And then you have to go, no.
Come down.
Come back down. It's okay. You can go to work afterwards and get all adrenalized again, but we need to teach the adrenal kidney system to come down. And then what it does is it actually creates a reverse engineer to the hypothalamus and pituitary. So it's like it's causing this back loop. And then it lets the higher, because up here is what sends the signal to release the chemical. So by actually working directly with that stress organ, it creates this interesting back loop.
So this is coming up as a question for myself, but a question for other people as well. What's the correlation between this whole adrenal fatigue trauma stuck in the nervous system and this formation of the back or back pain? Like for me, I have a scoliosis, which I'm like 90% sure in my path now that it's coming from that stress when I was young. As my spine was growing, it deformed right around my kidneys. I know there's no science behind it because I couldn't find it anywhere, but what's your observation?
What happens, so there's that adrenal is pumping.
Yep.
Because the adrenal is on top of the kidney, it contracts that muscle. The other thing is that when there's increased adrenal activity and higher heart rate, there's also higher blood pressure.
Yep.
Right? This is why if you're genetically just predisposed to heart disease, you might get heart disease. The arteries get thinned out and just not healthy. But with that increased filtration of the blood, the kidney gets worn out. Right. So it basically kind of, for lack of a better word, it's like it dries up like a raisin, like a prune. Right. And it literally is like that. And so with that constant tension, we forget, but there's fascia.
Yes.
There's tissue. There's ligaments. There's probably stuff in there we haven't even found yet, that's so sneaky. There's the lymph. There's all those organs. There's the diaphragm, right? The lungs. So what we think occurs and what we know based on working with people that have had a lot of trauma is they brace. So they contract. There's a threat. You contract to protect. You protect your organs. You contract so you don't feel. And what occurs is that you mentioned scoliosis. People will contract, and they'll contract in a pattern that's very unique. It could be that when a person is contracting, they're always sitting on the couch watching TV, just an example, and they're curled up on one side, and that's the same time every night mom and dad is having the fight, let's say. Yep. And so they contract against that, and they have a pillow, and it'd be like, well, how can you prove that? It's like, trust me, when you're in a certain body pattern and you're always contracting, day in, day out, years on end, your system will mold structurally to that shape. And then the organs will also mold to that. And then they'll have this pattern, right? And so that's what I see in terms of the physical body shifting and changing to accommodate the stress. And it's really a protective mechanism.
Yeah, and at the end of the day, all that happens in our body is a mean of survival for us to last longer on this planet. So For those that have had trauma, you may have a deformation of your bony or muscular soft tissue structure. Yeah. And for those who it's just it's a lifestyle overstress later on, it may just be back pain, constant back pain with no solution.
Yeah. And often back pain, put aside, say someone had an actual injury or accident, but if there wasn't anything like that, it's a tension. We have to remember that the musculoskeletal system is connected to the nervous system, just like every other system in the body. And when that stress goes in, the muscles contract. And if we don't come down and out, if I go back to that pattern, they're going to stay contracted. And over time, not only does the muscle get absolutely tired, but the bone doesn't get proper nutrition. The ligaments don't get proper nutrition. The spinal discs don't get proper nutrition because the system is living in a survival response. We're not meant to live in a survival response. If I go back to what I talked about with the animals in the wild, they get old and die because they're old, right? That's how we're supposed to end our lives, is through just old age. But our system, and I've seen this even with my own body, is you get more regulated in your nervous system, more in your higher brain in a good way, and you're not in constant survival chemistry, things heal.
Yes.
Right? Like I've seen healthier 50 and 60-year-olds than some 20-year-olds because they've taken the time to reteach the body how to move. They've gotten out of their stress chemistry. They're not repairing the system.
A very, very quick example of that is gray hair.
Yeah.
Like I had gray hair at 34 years old before I crashed, like my first crash when I went out of corporate world. And today, like I have no hair color. And my aunt was telling me, what's your hair color? I'm like, I have no. She says, you're like gray hair gone? Like, yeah, they're gone.
Yeah.
Because the body repaired itself.
Mm-hmm. Totally. It's hard for some to believe that, but it's true.
Yes.
We have an exquisite capacity to actually stay youthful for a very long time, but we don't know it because what we typically see, at least in North America, Europe, Australia, those is stress.
Mm-hmm. Is normal.
It's normal. And I had a facial actually the other day and the woman's like, oh, you have no wrinkles, and I'm 42 and I have some gray hair, but it's not like some of my friends went gray when they were in their 30s. And some will say, oh, it's genetic. And it might be, but depending on your stress chemistry, the genetics will either be good, they'll go to the bad side of your gene pool, or they'll go to the good side. And that's where epigenetics comes in, is we can shift our capacities to heal or get sick, pending what we do.
The choice we make.
And, as you said at the beginning, nutrition is important, but this is what's fooling a lot of people is they're like, why am I not getting better? I eat so well, but there's no connection to self, to the stress chemistry.
So I want to wrap this interview with that question and say, okay, so maybe you don't have adrenal fatigue, maybe there's no trauma. What lifestyle choices, modifications should we have in our life or do to prevent adrenal fatigue from happening?
I go back to what I just mentioned. If a person doesn't have that fatigue education, all about that first. If you can do anything, just that first. Learn about it, And then second is learning to be with that biological self-awareness. A lot can happen when we just have that. The biological self-awareness is like what kids naturally have, and then we bleach it out of them.
Yeah.
They don't need the education because they're innately, organically wired for that. But if we didn't get that, and we think there might be something a little off in how we listen to our body, then having the education plus that is really good. I would say personally that all of us who have the capacity to watch this have some form of trauma.
I would agree with you.
And not high score on the ACE study, but living in our post-hunter-gatherer world, living in a domesticated agricultural plants and animal world, we're living in boxes. We're not going to sleep with the sun and rising. Like it has. Our systems are changing in a bad way to accommodate these world stressors. And so what I have felt and seen, Stephanie, is that to be able to stay resilient, because we're not going to get rid of our houses, we're not going to get rid of technology. And I think we need to keep it like this, because we couldn't all survive on the land based on just the population. But if we can become more resilient in our system, learn about this stuff, and treat ourselves like we really are the animal that we are, but the higher brained animal, then we can do really well. But right now there's this disconnect where we don't have that education, and we have everyone just walking around as just big stress bombs.
Mm-hmm. Trying to survive in this abnormal environment for the human being.
Totally.
I know through following, and you should follow Irene on Instagram, and I'll put the link in the show note, but I know through your Instagram and my Instagram, we both are often in nature, and I don't think that's a coincidence.
No.
I know for me it's very healing. I don't understand the whole back end of it, but I just know it's very healing. What does nature bring to us?
Well, the nature thing is, it's natural.
Yes.
This is the interesting thing. We talk about organic this and organic that, but we forget that we're nature.
Mm-hmm.
Like, we're actually an organism like everything else in the world that's living and breathing. And so what happens when we go into nature, or even just, go to the park and we feel the grass under our feet and we feel the breeze, is we instantly orient.
Mm-hmm.
People think that there's some special thing in nature. It is. And yet what happens is when we go into nature, we are more primed to hear the bird, right? To see the branches. Like, buildings don't do that.
No.
Unless there's an earthquake, right? But there's less stimulus that is pleasant in a city environment. And so nature gives us that positive stimulus to orient to, and then it feedbacks to our own physiology, and it lets us know that we're part of that system.
Mm-hmm.
This is why cities that have been built poorly, I don't know the study, I read this somewhere, but there was a city somewhere where they neglected to put in park space. Oh my God. Like, the crime and the illness was so much higher than the apartment complexes like in another neighboring city. And it was because of that. There was nowhere for people to go to get connected to that. And so that is, to me, the environment nature piece. And because not everybody has that capacity, this is where being able to tune into your own biology is really important.
Mm-hmm.
And to have a plant, or, being in the bath and just feeling the fluid of the water can be enough to just bring us back into that organismic intelligence.
Body scan, like scanning your body through meditation. Like, no, I don't want to say deep meditation, but just with calming music and scanning your bodies from toes to head. Dancing,
moving. Right? Like, I sometimes feel better. I don't do this anymore, but when I went clubbing in my 20s, I felt exhilarated, like I had just gone for a hike. And it's because you're listening to the vibration, you're with people, you're engaging, you're moving, you're not just walking, you're like your arms are everywhere, you're moving your hips, you're moving your knees. It's a really important type of practice. Mm-hmm. We don't climb trees and, that kind of thing anymore.
That's amazing. That was a very powerful discussion that I know will affect, and I'm hoping it's going to affect thousands of women out there, because this is what you don't hear about adrenal fatigue.
No.
We hear about diets, we hear about nutrition, but we don't hear about this. And that's what I wanted to bring to you, people that are listening to this podcast, is this level of awareness. Now, the first step that Irene talked about is education. So you've got something for people right now that they can go to start, right?
Definitely. We'll give you the link.
Yeah.
You'll go to my site. There's not old, but I did a webinar on these topics, adrenal fatigue, burnout, quite a few months ago. And so we recorded it. It's live.
Okay.
But it's a recording. And with that, it's like an hour long. I cover all the basics. And from there, when you sign up, you'll get
3-step to healing burnout and adrenal fatigue.
Yeah. So there's a little more education. There's a little more resources. I've got within this 3 more ebooks. So like with audio lessons. So people can do that. And then if they want to actually try out what you did, then the 21-day tune-up is one way to do that. But there's a lot that'll keep you busy for like a month in here.
So what I would recommend is we start. So in the show notes, stephaniedodier.com/084, let's sign up for that free webinar to learn about Adrenal. Get your guide, get the ebook. And then I'm assuming they'll be attached to your email newsletter and correspondence systems and all of that, right?
Yeah. And once you get in there, I usually try to get an email out every week, some article, blog, that kind of thing. It's just knowing that this exists, get this on board, get it on your radar, have an open mind to this different way of looking at things. The people that really dive into this, it really shifts perspective.
It changes your life.
It changes your life, and it changes how you see others. You really start to have a compassionate and empathy for people that are doing horrible things. I know that sounds a little, but it's true. It's like everyone here that isn't that good to other people are that way because they weren't treated well at some point. And I just totally agree. I have to throw that in there because we're at this time right now where there's so much blame and hate. And it's like, oh, if we could just get on this basic human, we all have a nervous system. Mm-hmm. And anyone that's been harmed and threatened and hasn't resolved that is more likely to hurt others and themselves.
Yes. And it's not a question, again, back to my story, it's not a question of money. It's not a question of level in society, no matter where you were, without naming anything, because I don't want to get into this political view, but no matter where you were in society, that trauma of how life has happened to you is in you, and money can't buy you out of that.
Heck no.
So everything we talked about will be in the show note. I am blessed that you accepted to do this interview and to educate my crowd. Thank you very much.
You are so welcome.
And people will go and follow you.
Say hi. Tell me you found me through Stephanie.
Thank you, guys. Thank you, Irene.
Bye, everyone.
There you have it. Did it blow your mind like I promised in the intro? I hope so, because this is a message, this is a piece of knowledge that we should all have, that we should all know. But unfortunately, most of us don't have this piece of information. So I'm going to ask from a big favor from all of you listening right now. It is our responsibility to share this information, to let other people in our life, not just women at this point, anyone into our life know this information. So I'm asking you to share this episode via the device you're listening right now, via social media, to let people know that there's another reason why they may be sick, and they need to look at this piece, the nervous system, as a solution to heal themselves. So you can share it directly. You can tag me, tag Irene. Let's have some amazing conversation on this topic on social media. We're both ready to listen to you and to have you interact with us. So if you want the show note with all the links, I highly recommend that you take the webinar from Irene. All of the links are in the show note at stephaniedodier.com/084. I'm going to spell my name in case you're new. www.stephaniedodier.com/084. You can find Irene on social media at Irene Lyon and myself at Steph Dodier. And we're ready to receive your question and your feedback. Now we got some great show coming up. Next episode 86, we will have Dr. Taz, and we're going to talk about the whole phenomenon of superwoman and what we can do in our life to help us prevent the negative side effect of this whole superwoman phenomenon that affects a lot of us out there. I am so glad that you were able to join me and Irene on this very special episode. And I love you, and I will see you on the next show.